What's up, everybody, and welcome back to Fireside Giants. I'm your host, Anthony Rivardo, joined by my co-host, Alex Wilson. Famous Jameis, 30 for 30 himself. Jameis Winston is visiting with the New York Giants tomorrow afternoon. He's a free agent, and we've talked about him quite a bit on the channel, Alex, and we've thought that he could be a pretty good option for the New York Giants if they do miss out on Aaron Rodgers and Russell Wilson. Now, we're here. It's Monday. It's been a week since the start of the legal tampering period, and we still don't know where Aaron Rodgers is playing in 2025, and in fact, the Giants are still just waiting for him to make his decision. I find this whole thing to be kind of ridiculous at this point, the fact that it's gone on for a full week. But here we are, and the New York Giants are lining up their fallback options. So we know that option B here for the Giants, if they miss out on Rodgers, is Russell Wilson. They had a meeting with Joe Flacco, which we discussed, and now Jameis Winston is on the short list. So we're going to go ahead and discuss that, talk about what we think Jameis Winston could bring to the Giants if he does sign with them, and also they're having a visit with Zach Pascal, a wide receiver who I'm sure 90% of you have never heard of, but he played for the Cardinals last year and was a core special teams player for them. So just some depth there. We'll discuss him as well and what he could bring to the New York Giants. But Alex, how are you doing today, my friend? How are you feeling about famous Jameis coming in the building for the Giants and having an interview to be the Giants' starting quarterback?
Well, definitely not entirely excited by the idea of going with one of the worst quarterback options, but Jameis Winston's one of the interesting players where on any given day he could throw for 500 yards and 4 touchdowns. You're like, what the hell just happened? Like, where did this just come from? God, maybe? I don't know. And then, according to Jameis, probably. But, you look at his ups and downs, his polarizing nature, he'll go from being like the best quarterback of the week to the worst quarterback the next week. In one half, he could be amazing. The next half, he could throw 3 interceptions. Like, that's the game you play with Jameis Winston. He is volatile, polarizing, any synonym you can come up with to describe his style of play. It is just erratic, but he's fun to watch because, let alone his clips, his voice clips of after the game, pre-game, his speeches are absolutely hilarious. But he's balls to the wall, man. Like, he goes hard every single game, and every single game he makes ridiculous plays, and he extends plays, and he's not afraid to move and throw on the run and take risks. Like, he is a true and tried gunslinger. However, Anthony, Brian Daboll wants consistency at quarterback. Jameis Winston is the exact opposite of consistency. He's consistently erratic and consistently volatile. That's not exactly what the Giants have been preaching they want over the last year or so. So I don't necessarily feel like he's the best fit for what they're looking for in terms of consistency, but he's going to throw touchdown passes, and he's going to throw a lot of yards. And if you want those two things, he can do it. He's just going to turn the ball over a freaking ton. So that's kind of the reason why the Giants reinforcing their defense might be a good thing, because they're going to have to stop a lot of red zone opportunities for other teams. They're going to have to stop a lot of short yardage situations and backed up in their own zone, because Winston's going to turn the ball over in that instance. But with that being said, I'll ask you this. Out of him or Joe Flacco, who would you prefer of those two quarterbacks?
Dude, I want to watch something fun. So I'm going Jameis Winston. Jameis Winston is objectively fun to watch play football. Joe Flacco is just Joe Flacco. He's a 40-year-old guy, stands in the pocket like a statue and throws the ball downfield. Jameis Winston, I'm holding my breath on every single play. I never know what's going to happen, and I love that. That is so much fun. It's going to be most likely a lost season for the New York Giants anyway. They're coming off of a 3-14 season. Yes, they added some talent in free agency. However, they have the toughest schedule on paper next season. I want to try and have some fun through that tough schedule. So I'd like to watch Jameis Winston play. And honestly, Alex, I said this a lot last season when we were watching the likes of Daniel Jones, Tommy DeVito, Tim Boyle, and Drew Lock. The Giants quarterbacks, for some reason, last season were all just terrified of throwing the ball downfield and very conservative with the football. They refused to push the ball in the tight windows, and they really didn't want to turn the ball over. And I kept saying, I miss having a Giants quarterback who wasn't afraid to throw interceptions. A quarterback that turns the ball over is a quarterback that's trying to make plays. We used to watch Eli Manning. I always bring up that one classic play versus the Seahawks, the Legion of Boom Seahawks, no less. He's standing in the pocket. He throws it up into double coverage. Who's in double coverage? It's Richard Sherman and Cam Chancellor, two of the greatest defensive backs in NFL history. Eli throws that thing into double coverage anyway. It gets batted around. It ends up being a one-handed Victor Cruz touchdown of 80 yards or something like that. I miss having a quarterback that's willing to take those kinds of chances. We haven't had that since Eli Manning, and in fact, the final few years of Eli Manning, we didn't even have that. So if Jameis Winston is going to bring that element back into the Giants offense where we can be excited and we can watch Malik Neighbors get some of these deep opportunities, whether they're in double coverage or single coverage, I don't care. Let's give these guys a chance to make some plays and push the ball downfield. The Giants' lack of a deep passing attack over the last 6 years has been horrific to watch. We've been banging the table since we started this podcast 5 years ago, Alex. The Giants need to push the ball downfield more. We're still making the same talking points. Nothing has changed in 5 years. And you know what? If they do sign Jameis Winston, I know that something will change. And I also know that of Russell Wilson too, which is why I would like him to be the guy that the Giants land. But as the fallback option, if it's between those two guys, Alex, Joe Flacco or Jameis Winston, sure, I get it. You get a higher floor with Joe Flacco, but you get a higher ceiling with Jameis Winston, in my opinion. And with either one of those guys, it doesn't change the fact that you need to draft a quarterback, which is where I was going to go with this next, Alex. The thing with Russell Wilson and Aaron Rodgers, if the Giants are able to land one of those two guys, and this is something we've discussed plenty of times, they don't need to draft a quarterback. They still could draft a quarterback with the number 3 overall pick or trading up to 1, but they no longer need to because they have a serviceable starter who could at least last through 2025, maybe even into 2026. But if they sign Joe Flacco or Jameis Winston, these are backup quarterbacks who are going to be starting quarterbacks for the Giants. They now need to draft a quarterback in the top 3, and that's really the whole dynamic that changes here. So, Alex, what's your perspective on that? You know, talking about how if the Giants do have to land on one of these fallback options like Jameis Winston, it's got to be Jameis Winston plus a rookie. I imagine you agree with me.
Yeah, for sure. And that was my initial kind of claim earlier this offseason was I think Winston's a great option as a bridge quarterback. And if the Giants are intending, and that's kind of where I was at a disconnect with why the Giants kept Joe Shane, because now they have to try and win football games while drafting that rookie quarterback, and the bridge has to be much better, and they may want a lot more in terms of money and years, and there's a lot of different variables that go into that. But, you know, my take was if we are trying to build for the future, it needs to be a one-and-done quarterback. And look, if Russell or Aaron Rodgers are one and done, that's fine as a bridge. But the difference here, Anthony, is that contract is likely going to have a void year. So the Giants are going to have to pay some money next year when Russ or Rodgers are no longer on the team. Jameis Winston is going to cost you like $5 million for one season. So you get Winston, you could draft Shadur Sanders or Jackson Dart and sign the best right guard available on the market and walk into the season with a much better supporting cast, but very unknowns at quarterback. But the intention here was always to be a bridge and then a rookie learning behind them and then eventually to assume that role. So, you know, that's kind of where I was thinking earlier this offseason, and obviously the Giants have been interested in a much kind of more prominent quarterback, which is why they have other guys in mind. But I agree with you. I would rather Russ than Flacco for one simple reason. Jameis Winston than Flacco for one simple reason, because he's a lot more fun to watch, like you said. Like, he is just going to be exciting. And the truth is, look, Joe Flacco's not pushing us to the playoffs, guys. Joe Flacco's not. He is a stopgap. He is a bridge, one and done, that's it. Jameis Winston, you never know with him. Like, he could just go on an absolute tear. Like, his upside is like 4,000 plus yards and 30 plus touchdowns. Like, that is his upside. But he's also going to throw 30 interceptions in the process. So you have to have a good defense to stop opposing teams if you're going to have a quarterback that volatile and that risky. But it's going to be really fun. Every Sunday, you better believe we're all tuning in to watch Jameis Winston and to see what kind of crazy stuff he does that week. If John Mara wants a moneymaker, it's Jameis Winston of those guys. And look, Rodgers obviously brings eyes in because he's Aaron Rodgers, and Russell Wilson even brings eyes in too. They have a better chance of winning football games and being a lot more protective and conservative with the football, and just better decision making overall. But you're paying for what you get, right? Winston's $5 million a year, and Rodgers and Russ are going to be $30+ million a year. I actually don't see like an astronomical difference in wins between all those guys. You know, I think Winston probably comes in at like 5 or 6, and Russ and Rodgers could be like 6 or 7. I don't think this team's winning 8+ games next season with our schedule in the NFC East. I know that's a bit negative, but I just think that's where we are right now, especially if we have a rookie and we don't go. You know, if we draft a Travis Hunter, that could change things, or Abdul Carter could change things. But if we draft a rookie quarterback and you don't use that pick on a BPA, it definitely, you know, impacts the wins projection. But, you know, maybe Winston's 2 or 3 less wins for next year than the other guys. But if you're not going to make the playoffs anyway and you're just rebuilding for the future, trying to make progress and draft a quarterback, maybe it makes sense. I don't know.
Yeah, I get where you're coming from with that, but at the same time, the money that they would be spending on a Russell Wilson or Aaron Rodgers for this season is only money spent for this season. It doesn't affect their 2026 cap space. It may be marginally if it's a 2-year deal, but it's going to be low guarantees in 2026 anyway. So I feel like if you want to put the best product on the football field possible, which is what the Giants should be trying to do, they should be trying to get Russell Wilson or Aaron Rodgers. And I do see a big difference between a Russell Wilson and a Jameis Winston at this point in their careers, because I think Russell Wilson is still capable, Alex, of playing 17 games for you. Jameis Winston is going to start 10 games for this Giants team before he's benched for a rookie quarterback. Like, that is the best case scenario. That is the outcome that we can project here. So I think you get what you pay for with these guys, and you know how I feel about it. The Giants need to become a good team before they can become a great team. I say that all the time, and expecting them to sign Jameis Winston, draft Shador or Cam, and then immediately become Super Bowl contenders overnight is a very unrealistic expectation. More realistically, they sign a Russell Wilson or Aaron Rodgers, they compete for a year, they win 6 to 8 games, maybe they do the same the following year, and then they get their quarterback and they plug him into a roster that's been built upon the last 2 seasons with added talent. So I think that's the more preferable path for me. But again, I want to stress, like, if they sign Jameis or Flacco, it's 10 games of those guys is what they're signing them for. We're not getting 17 games of Jameis Winston, because they will absolutely be drafting a quarterback at number 3 overall. And even if the Giants are competitive and, they're in the mix, they're going to go ahead and move him out of the lineup to get that rookie going. But I will say this, in terms of win projections for Jameis, Alex, I do think the Giants have a chance to probably win more games with Jameis than they would with Flacco, simply because I think that talent around Jameis Winston gets elevated. And what I mean by that is, even when he was a starting quarterback for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, I mean, Mike Evans was in his prime and he was going on a tear, and every single time Mike Evans wanted the ball, Mike Evans got the ball and he was making plays and he was putting up career numbers. And I also think when you look at last season, because this is one thing that I know a lot of Giants fans might initially respond to when we say Giants are interested in Jameis Winston, we're kind of advocating for that. They might say, okay, but why was he benched last year for DTR? He was benched last year for DTR, Alex. You and I are in agreement on this. That was the most blatant tank job that we've seen in the NFL in recent times. The Browns realized that Jameis gave them a chance to win games down the stretch, and that would be more detrimental to their future than it would be beneficial. So they moved him out of the lineup for DTR, and they made the excuse of, well, DTR is a young guy. We need to see what we have in him before we get to the offseason. They already knew what they had in DTR. We all know what they had in DTR. They had a pile of nothing. So they moved him into the lineup in order to lose those games. Jameis Winston was playing some decent football. He wasn't playing great. He wasn't an elite quarterback, but he was playing down the stretch of those games before he got benched good enough to keep the team competitive. Even if you want to look at that game versus Denver where he had almost 500 passing yards, 4 touchdowns, yes, 3 interceptions, but still, the ball is being put into a place where the playmakers can make plays. There's talent around him being maximized. If you look at Jerry Jeudy's production last year with the Browns before and after Jameis Winston was benched, it's a night and day difference. And that's why I'm so excited if the Giants do land Jameis for Malik Neighbors specifically, because I know that Jameis is going to get the ball into Malik Neighbors' hands. And I also think the same thing of Darius Slayton, because I think Slayton is a guy who's been overlooked in the Giants offense over the last few years because of inadequate quarterback play. But when Tyrod Taylor stepped into the lineup, what did he do? He maximized Darius Slayton. And I think Jameis Winston might look at Slayton as a similar player that Tyrod looked at him as a guy that I can just chuck this thing up downfield, let him go get under it, make some plays. So I think this Giants offense actually could see a major uptick. And when we do talk about saving jobs, Alex, whether we're talking about Joe Shane, I think it's kind of tough for him. He's in a difficult position here with the quarterback spot. But if you're talking about Brian Daboll saving his job, doesn't matter what happens to the Giants next season if this offense is still bottom ranked. That's a detriment to Brian Daboll, because for the last 3 years, this offense has regressed every single season. It needs to be better this year, and I think that we can almost guarantee, yes, the turnovers might go up, but so will the yards per game and the touchdowns per game and just points per game in general will go up if Jameis Winston is in the starting lineup for the first half of the season for the New York Giants, and that might save Brian Daboll his job. And so that's why I think Jameis Winston just truly makes more sense than Joe Flacco if we're looking at it from that standpoint, from the perspective of Brian Daboll trying to maximize an offense here and save his job for the future.
Yeah, so I want to run through a couple different scenarios and get your brief synopsis on each one, because I do believe that there's a couple different ways the Giants could go about this. And the first one is, would you rather sign Russ or Rodgers to, let's say, a 1-year, $35 million deal, but you have to create a void year for next year, and you aren't able to afford now a right guard, like a top line right guard in free agency, or whoever's left, and make a big upgrade there? Or would you rather, and let's assume that if you're going to sign one of those guys to a 1-year deal, you're just going BPA. You're not necessarily taking a quarterback, you're just going to go BPA at 3. Or would you rather sign Jameis Winston to a 1-year, $5 million deal, sign the best right guard available, and draft a quarterback? Within this intentions, probably Shedeur Sanders. Would you rather go in that direction, or would you rather go in the direction of you're going to be competitive, but you're not going to have a quarterback on the roster in BPA? Because that's probably what the Giants would end up doing if they go either of those directions.
I think it's really tough to tell, honestly, because I think that there's a way that both of those paths could walk you to long-term success, but it's just going to look vastly different, and I think it depends on, well, if you're asking me what I would do or for what I think Joe Schoen would do, it's completely different. And this is why we advocated for cleaning house, because there's conflicting interests here, right? Are we looking at trying to build the best roster long term, or are we looking at trying to win in 2025 so that these guys can save their jobs? And that's where these questions become so difficult, because I can't really give you an answer based on what I would do, because it doesn't matter what I would do, because Joe Schoen is just going to do what's going to save his job, is what I think. So what of those two options, I'm going to alter your question. Of those two options, what do I think gives the Giants the best chance, or gives Joe Schoen the best chance to save his job? And I think that's the Russell Wilson / Aaron Rodgers option. I think those guys make the team the most competitive. And I think an underrated selling point here, if the Giants do go BPA at number 3 and they drafted Travis Hunter and Abdul Carter, and that guy is an offensive rookie of the year, or defensive rookie of the year, or both if it's Travis Hunter, since that's a possibility for him, that's another selling point out there for Joe Schoen to save his job. Even if they only win 6 games, 5 games. Yeah, but I drafted the best rookie in the league this year, so I have more reason to stick around another year and draft another draft class. He can always sell it, and that's another thing that when you look at the BPA aspect of the Giants in the draft, and if they can open themselves up for that BPA, I think that's another way that Joe Schoen can open himself up to have another selling point to John Mara to save his job.
It's kind of interesting, right? Because that's, to me, like, not a good selling point, right? And the reason I say that is because he's every year in a position to draft a guy like that, right? Like, every year he has a chance to draft the best rookie in the draft class, because he's drafting top 5, top 6 every season. So, like, again, it's like not encouraging to me. Malik Neighbors, he was one of the best rookies in the league last year, and we still won 3 games. So, like, it doesn't matter to me, right? Like, it doesn't matter to me how good his rookies are if you're not winning football games. Now, if he drafts Travis Hunter, Abdul Carter, and they go off and the Giants win 7-8 games, that's a little bit different. That's a different story, because now you have a different kind of equation here where it's not a 3-win team, it's a 7-8 win team, and you have a couple really, really good freaking players for the future. Now, I'll ask you this, Anthony, because it seems like Cam Ward's going first overall right now, and the Browns are kind of in a weird spot. Like, they don't know, nobody really knows what the Browns are going to do. Are they going to take Sanders? Probably not. Because we keep hearing things like Sanders could go 3, but he could also slide to the early 20s. And it's like, okay, who the hell knows what's up with Sanders and his draft stock right now? Nobody really knows where he's going to end up going. The Giants could absolutely take him at 3, but if the Browns, and I know you're a big proponent of BPA, but in the best interest of Joe Schoen, it's kind of like, you could go both ways. Is it in his best interest to go BPA and get the guy that's going to be the best possible player for this team? Or is it in his best interest to draft a quarterback and lock himself to a player, a young QB, that makes him a lot more hard to dispose of, because you want him to build around that, and you don't want a new regime inheriting a quarterback, right? Like, it's kind of an interesting scenario. So if you end up with, let's say, Russell Wilson, and the Giants are at 3, Cam Ward's off the board, let's say 1A, 1B, Travis Hunter, Abdul Carter are there at 3, just assuming one of them will be there. I mean, there's a guarantee one of them will be there, most likely. But, what are you going to do in that scenario? Like, do you think it's in the best interest to go Sanders and maybe reach for that, or just go BPA? Like, what's better for Joe Schoen?
You're saying if they've signed Russell Wilson?
Yes.
It's BPA. I think it's BPA. I think, yeah, because you build this
roster.
Even
if it's just 1 year, though?
Even if it's just for 1 year with Russell Wilson, I think you go BPA and you try and make the most of this year, and you try and get a quarterback the following year. I think that's the way that Joe Schoen needs to play that. if we're looking at it from that perspective. Now, if we're looking at it from a fan's perspective of wanting to build long-term and have a future in place, I think you go Shedeur Sanders. But then that also just opens up the can of worms. How do you feel about Shedeur Sanders? I feel better about him than you do, Alex. We know that. You know that I think he has franchise quarterback potential. I don't think that you necessarily feel like he doesn't have that, but you don't feel like it's as guaranteed as I do. Not that I feel like it's guaranteed, but I think he's a good player, and I know a lot of Giants fans are split on Shedeur Sanders, and it's not just Giants fans. It's fans all across the NFL, and it's evaluators inside of the NFL, and all of these guys who do media. There's a reason that he's ranking in the 20s to maybe even the 40s on some draft boards with ESPN, The Athletic, PFF, wherever you look. He is well down the draft boards, and that is a reason to be a little bit concerned about Shedeur Sanders at number 3 overall. There are fans who don't want to reach with that pick. When you're picking top 3, you have an opportunity to get a slam dunk player. And for Joe Schoen, if he's picking top 3 and he doesn't get a slam dunk player, I don't know how you can justify keeping that guy around in 2026. Therefore, it's got to be BPA at number 3. Even though he might feel like Shedeur Sanders has a chance to be a franchise quarterback, if he's got a strong conviction on Sanders, then he takes Sanders. But if he doesn't have that strong conviction, and if he's with the rest of the league and he thinks he's a top 20 to 30 player in the class, then I think you have to go BPA if you have Russell Wilson in the building, because that's going to give you the best chance to save your job, in my opinion, if you're Joe Schoen.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think the problem here is, well, I guess not the problem, but if they go Russ or Rodgers, it gives them the option to pass on Sanders at 3, right? It gives them the choice to say, we don't need Sanders to play as a rookie. But if you sign Jameis Winston, you're gonna probably end up flipping the page at some point in 2025, right? Like, you're gonna flip that page to the rookie at some point. Now the question is, look, draft prospects are impossible to predict, right? Like, we've seen Brock Purdy pan out, and we've seen even Russ was a 3rd round pick. We've seen many quarterbacks become something when everyone thought they were nothing. So yes, rankings don't necessarily mean a quarterback is going to be bad or they're going to fail. It just means that they have flaws and red flags that people value and people, kind of put stock into. But I will say, I mean, anonymous NFC executive Brandon Brown has said many a good things to Jordan Reed on ESPN about Sanders. So I still don't necessarily think the Giants are going to pass on Sanders. I still think that there's a very good chance they take him at 3, even if it's not my preferred kind of path.
I think if they miss out on Rodgers or Russ, I think that they're going to go ahead and they're going to sign Flacco or Winston. They're going to take Sanders because they do feel strongly about him, in my opinion. But if they get Russ in there or Rodgers, I think they're going to go best player available. But what I wanted to say there, because you were mentioning Russell Wilson was a 3rd round pick, Brock Purdy was a 7th round pick, obviously the last pick in the draft famously, and we've seen a lot of other guys. I mean, Jalen Hurts was a 2nd round pick, Dak Prescott was a 4th round pick. We can keep going. There are some viable starting quarterbacks in the NFL who were drafted in the middle to late rounds, and how those guys got drafted was essentially the team drafting them saying, we think this is the best player available. We do not need a quarterback right now, but this is the BPA, and we're going to throw a dart at the board. And I know I always say that in a punny way because of Jackson Dart being in this draft class, but even outside of Jackson Dart, if the Giants do pass on a quarterback at number 3, I've heard a narrative before from people that is, you can't draft a quarterback if you're not going to do it in the top 5. Just don't do it at all. Just wait till next year. Absolutely not. Throw a dart. Take a chance, even if it's on a Will Howard, a Kyle McCord, a Tyler Shuck. I don't know, and I don't care. But at some point in this draft, the Giants need to take a chance at a quarterback. Look at what the Patriots did last year. They drafted Drake May at number 3 overall. They drafted Joe Milton in the 6th round. Joe Milton's asking price, I was reading this morning, Alex, 3rd round pick. Look at the return on investment 1 year later for a guy who played 1 game in the NFL, and he spoiled the Patriots draft pick. 1 Week 18 meaningless good performance from Joe Milton boosted his value from a 6th round pick last year to a 3rd round pick in a trade this year. That's why the Giants should be drafting quarterbacks in the mid to late rounds. Worst case, you get a developmental backup who doesn't pan out and you cut him a few years later. But you know what? That's not even that bad, because a lot of those guys do go on to be coaches or otherwise, like Davis Webb. And there's another guy, but I can't remember. Davis Webb is a good example, though. The Giants need to be taking quarterbacks in the middle rounds, though. So if they don't take one, Kellen Moore, that's a great one. Perfect, yeah. So that's kind of my take on it, though. If you're going to take the quarterback at 3, then you need to build around that quarterback and make him your franchise guy. But if you're going to pass on the quarterback at 3, at least get some sort of developmental prospect in here from the middle rounds, because you really never know when you do hit on one. And the best teams in the league, they don't draft a quarterback and then just stop there. The fact that the Giants haven't drafted a quarterback in 6 years is honestly ridiculous.
No,
you
dude,
see teams like the 49ers.
It's so bad.
It's
one of the worst things. It's honestly like one of the things that I look at the team and say this is one of the reasons that they are one of the worst teams in the league, because they do not take chances on guys even with remote upside. Like Milton was a 6th round pick. I would have absolutely thrown a dart at Milton. They could have flipped him for a 3rd round pick this year, or maybe even considered him as a potential competitor. You know what I mean? At least had a quarterback on the roster that wasn't Tommy DeVito, who is a non-factor to me. So like, they're just wasting roster spots at this point. Like, not drafting a quarterback at any point in the last 6 years is malpractice in every sense. Every single sense. No, I don't think there's another team out there that hasn't done that, unless they have a superstar like a Josh Allen or a Patrick Mahomes or whoever it might be, you know?
Those teams have drafted quarterbacks too, though, in the mid to late rounds, I'm pretty sure. And I think it's always the best example for me is the 49ers. Like you mentioned Brock Purdy. I think a lot of fans of the Giants, because we're so hyper-focused on the Giants, forget what the 49ers invested into Trey Lance. And it was an egregious amount of assets. Like they traded future first-round and second-round draft capital to move up a few spots and take Trey Lance. And even though they did that, Alex, they still burned one of those late-round picks on Brock Purdy. And Brock Purdy ended up being their franchise quarterback. That's the prime example. Just because you've drafted a quarterback, just because you have a franchise quarterback, you don't stop drafting quarterbacks. You don't just call it a day. Oh, we have Daniel Jones. It's done. We don't need to add any more talent to the quarterback room. Are you kidding me? Keep adding talent. The Dallas Cowboys, when they drafted Dak Prescott in the 4th round, Tony Romo was still their franchise quarterback, like unequivocally was still a franchise guy. He got hurt midway through his Dak's rookie season. Dak took over, and then Dak became the franchise quarterback. But that's only because Tony Romo got hurt. Tony Romo was still a franchise quarterback at that point. They were just adding a developmental backup plan in there. The Giants haven't done that in 6 years, and I just find it utterly ridiculous. So I'm glad we are on the same page about that one, Alex, because I think that's always a crazy take from Giants fans. If you're not going to draft a quarterback in the 1st round, don't draft one at all. Absolutely not. The Giants need to be taking darts at the board, like you said.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you look at just where the Giants are right now with no quarterbacks on the roster, they have to fill 2 spots, right? They're going to add 2 quarterbacks this offseason, Anthony. We don't know who they'll be just yet, but I have to imagine they are going to draft one somewhere. And here's another thing that I'll float your direction and see how you feel about it. I think Art Stapleton said on Twitter, the same package that people were willing to give up to move up to number 1 overall, which likely is no longer on the board, would you consider packaging picks to move back up into the 1st round? Let's say Dart ends up falling to around like the 20s range. Would you trade back up into the 1st round to get Dart and still walk away with Travis Hunter? I think that's an interesting conversation because, look, Jackson Dart, there's only 3 quarterbacks really worth drafting in the 1st round this year. I don't think, if people are talking about Sanders potentially in the 20s, I think Field Yates of ESPN said that, and Dart's the 3rd quarterback in this class, there's a very high probability that he ends up in the 20s as well. If I'm the Giants, and there's always teams willing to move back and get more draft capital, I'm absolutely considering what that will cost to go get Jackson Dart, who's a year younger than both Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders and has displayed tremendous upside. And I think Dable might be able to get the most out of a player like that and let him sit and wait behind a Russ, behind a Rodgers, behind a Winston, whoever, and you just let him learn. Let him learn the verbiage, the acumen, just everything you need to know about the offense. And you might actually end up giving up less to go get him than going up to 1st overall. So it is an opportunity. It is an option. Maybe, Anthony, we'll have to do a separate episode on what that might look like, a trade up into the mid-20s to get Jackson Dart, what the draft capital would have to be. But you also get the 5th-year option. So that also is another valuable piece to this equation. It's not a bad perspective if you're the Giants to say, we like Sanders, but him and Dart, we don't think they're that far apart. We feel as though we can get Hunter, move up and get Dart, and feel like we don't have to give up a future 1st-round pick. That might be an avenue where they look to explore.
But what about trading up for Shedeur Sanders?
Well, if he's there at 22, it could be possible. Depends how far he falls.
Listen,
if the Giants pass on him at 3, I think he's going to drop like a rock. That's what I think.
Kind of think the same. The buzz really is that he is falling down draft boards and that a lot of mock drafts now, Alex, from these insiders and guys who talk to people in the leagues have him going in the 20s or out of the 1st round, some of them. So there is a chance that Shedeur Sanders does really fall down the draft and that this is a 1 quarterback class, as we've heard some insiders say in the past. But whether it's Sanders or Dart, whatever, let's just talk about it in theory and concept. I like it, and I do, because we've talked about this before on the channel, and you're right, we should do a full breakdown on what we would be willing to give up in that trade, because I think it's a great idea. Listen, you're getting a rookie quarterback with a fifth-year option on his contract, and you're getting, if it's Jackson Dart, a really great scheme fit for Brian Daboll. I really like the way that Dart plays the game, and I think the way that he plays makes a lot of sense for what Brian Daboll wants to do in his offense. So I like that idea, man. If you're going to have a 42-year-old quarterback slinging the rock in 2025, yeah, you better get some young developmental talent behind him, and I think Jackson Dart would make a lot of sense, and I would be willing to trade up for him and take a chance on him in the later of the first round. But the only problem there, Alex, is you got to worry about all the other teams that might want to draft him in front of you, and you don't want to get, you don't want to get your hopes up and bank on Jackson Dart being there in the late rounds, because all it takes is one team to ruin your draft plans. One team in the top 15 says, you know what, screw it, we're just going to take Jackson Dart out of nowhere, and then your whole draft plan is screwed up. So I do wonder, though, Alex, this is something that the Vikings did last year. They made their trade to get a second first-round pick well in advance of the draft to make sure that they could get J.J. McCarthy plus another player. They did that way before. I wonder if the Giants, if they do sign Russell Wilson or Aaron Rodgers, if well in advance of the draft they make a deal like that, rather than waiting to see how the draft board falls, if they just hedge their bets and get 2 first-round picks in this draft class anyway. I will say this about that, though. This is a really strong draft class through rounds 2 to 4, and I don't know how much of that draft capital I really want to sacrifice in advance if it's not a guarantee that we're getting that quarterback. But if we can guarantee that we're getting a Dart or a Sanders with that second first-round pick, yeah, I'd be all over it, and I'm all in.
It would be a super interesting method to address the quarterback position. I really am curious to see what happens here in terms of where these guys end up landing in about a month, a little bit more than that. So I guess we'll see how these players start to rise and fall at the draft. I mean, the Titans not doing anything in free agency and really having no interest in getting a quarterback means they're drafting Cam Ward and probably a backup, and they have Will Levis still, and Ward's going to start probably day one for them, most likely. So it's an interesting situation unfolding over there in Tennessee. But the quest for the first overall pick for the Giants, according to Jordan Raanan of ESPN, said that they appear to be dead. They appear to be dead. Look, a lot of things can happen over the next couple days, a couple weeks. The Titans can come out of nowhere and convince Rodgers or Russ to sign there, and we'll be like, whoa, okay, that changes things. You just don't know. They could just be hiding in the weeds. I do think that for the Giants, though, the longer they wait, the longer Joe Schoen risks the possibility of losing both. I think that Russ seems to be waiting too, because, I mean, let's be honest. It's actually in the best interest of Russ to wait, because if Rodgers decides to go to a specific team, the market gets smaller, right? The market gets smaller, and he gets to drive up the price for the team in the launch, and the Browns and the Giants most likely. And he gets to create a little bidding war between them. The more teams, the more demand. Obviously the less is going to cost. But if there's more demand, or rather, sorry, it's the opposite. If there's more demand, obviously, yes, its price is going to be higher. But in this instance, the fewer teams that are interested in a quarterback and one that's going to start and win games for you and pay that price, you start to find, potential suitors there that might be able to pay a little bit more. Maybe an extra year could be a big difference for a team like the Browns and the Giants. And look, for all we know right now, Rodgers is waiting to see if the Minnesota Vikings want him, which to me says that he doesn't want to go to the Steelers. And the Steelers need a quarterback, too. I forgot about them. Not let alone the Giants and the Browns. So there's a lot of teams that are in the market right now. The longer the Giants wait and they're not the most attractive destination, the more difficult it might become. So, this is a really kind of a pivotal moment for Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll to see where they go with this. And I mean, if I were them right now, I'd be breathing heavy. I wouldn't be sleeping much at night, because their jobs are certainly hanging in the balance. Whoever they get at quarterback may define their future, whether it's a veteran or whether it's a rookie. I don't necessarily think, Anthony, and I'll ask you this before we wrap up here. Do you think drafting a rookie, and let's be honest, most rookies are not very good. They don't step in immediately, are great, especially because the Giants have so much turnover on offense all the time, and different coaches and different players playing prominent positions. Do you think that a rookie quarterback would be enough to convince John Mara to give Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll another year? Is that an element, or do they have to look good? Or is it just having a rookie quarterback that makes a difference?
I think the rookie quarterback has to show some promise. And I think that stems from John Mara's frustration and anger that he expressed at the end of the season. He said that he needs to be happier at the end of the year in 2026 than he was, entering 2025. And so what that tells me is that the New York Giants need to win football games this year in order for those guys to save their jobs. He made it abundantly clear, John Mara did, that he was close to firing Joe Schoen and Brian Dable. They barely hung on here and saved their jobs. So I don't think that just simply having the rookie quarterback would do it for them. And I think that John Mara would be willing to fire these guys, even if they drafted their rookie quarterback. He didn't play well or he barely played at all. I think that they'll be fine bringing in a new regime and letting the new regime decide what to do with that quarterback that Joe Schoen drafted. That's me personally. So I think the best way for Joe Schoen to save his job is to win football games, and that's going to come by signing Russell Wilson or Aaron Rodgers. And I think that's why he's been begging, that's the report, begging Aaron Rodgers to sign with the New York Giants. So that's my take on it. And, really interesting discussion here. I like how our discussions always evolve from just talking a little bit about Jameis Winston, so now we're talking about Jackson Dart at pick number 25 for the New York Giants. So always fun. I'll throw this out there, though, just because we didn't really touch on Zach Pascal. And I'll say the quick scouting report on him for everybody who stuck around to the end of this episode and wanted to hear about Zach Pascal, who the Giants are having a visit with. He has a connection to Giants wide receivers coach Mike Groh from when he played at with the Indianapolis Colts, and he's a decent run blocker, but he's primarily a core special teams player. I think he only played 6% of snaps for the Cardinals last season on offense, but played over 60% of the snaps on special teams. He's a gunner, is what I understand him to be on special teams, and when he does play on offense, he usually goes out there to play on running downs because he's a pretty good dirty work run blocker from the wide receiver position. So that's what the New York Giants are probably bringing him in for this visit for, the connection to Mike Groh, plus his ability to add something, add an element as a run blocker from the wide receiver position. So that's the scouting report on Zach Pascal. We'll see if the New York Giants do end up signing him. I imagine since they're having him in for a visit, they probably will. And of course, we'll react more to that if he does sign on. But more discussions for the quarterback to come. We're just sitting here waiting for Aaron Rodgers, same as all of you guys, same as the New York Giants. And once we get some more info on that, we will update you right here on Fireside Giants. So make sure to leave a like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, ring the bell so you don't miss an episode, and comment your thoughts down below in the comment section. If you listen to Apple or Spotify, make sure to leave us a 5-star review. Go ahead and follow us on all of our social media channels at Fireside Giants. Without further ado, we'll catch you on the next one. Have a good one, and let's go Giants.
Perfect.